Stuff. Every entrepreneur dreams of finding the one strategy, the perfect plan that will finally take their business to the next level. But here's the brutal truth: strategy alone will never scale your business. If it could, stuff. Every entrepreneur with a Google search bar would already be a billionaire. So what's the real problem we're going to solve today? Why some businesses with the BS strategy still fail, while others with imperfect plans absolutely explode in growth? Stuff. So many entrepreneurs come to me and they say, Tony, I just need the right strategy. If I had the right marketing plan, if I knew the right funnel, if I had the right investment strategy, stuff, I could scale. And I look at them and smile because I know exactly where that road leads. Listen, you can have the most brilliant strategy in the world. You can read every book, attend every mastermind, stuff, pay for every coaching program, but if your psychology isn't primed, if your mindset isn't built for growth, that strategy is going to sit on the shelf collecting dust. Because here's the truth, stuff. Business is 80% psychology and only 20% mechanics. Let that sink in. The mechanics matter, of course they do, but they're not what separates the businesses that thrive from the ones that collapse. It's the psychology of the leader, stuff, the psychology of the team, the hunger, the certainty, the resilience, the absolute refusal to quit. That's what makes the difference. Think about this. Have you ever seen two people go after the same opportunity? Same market, same tools, same economy. Stuff. One of them takes off like a rocket, the other one crashes and burns. Was it because of the strategy? No, they both had access to the same mechanics. The difference was in the psychology. One had the psychology of a winner, stuff. The psychology of someone who would push through rejection, push through doubt, push through failure, and keep moving forward no matter what. The other one had doubts, fears, limiting beliefs that held them back, and no strategy in the world could save them. Stuff. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, I worked with a group of entrepreneurs during one of the worst economic times we'd seen in decades. And I'll never forget, half of them were terrified, paralyzed by the news, by the market, by what everybody was saying. Stuff. They froze. The other half, they looked at the same environment and said, this is the moment. This is the time to go all in, to innovate, to push harder than ever. Same economy, same conditions, same information. What made the difference? It wasn't strategy. It was psychology. The ones with fear-based psychology shrank back. The ones with growth psychology stepped forward and built empires. See, most people think they're limited by resources. They say, I don't have enough time, stuff. I don't have enough money. I don't have the right team. I don't have the connections. But that's not the truth. You're not limited by resources. You're limited by your own psychology. If you have the right psychology, you become resourceful, stuff. You figure things out. You get creative. You find a way where there doesn't seem to be a way. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions and you start creating the conditions. That's the difference between someone who scales and someone who stays stuck, stuff. And listen, I'm not here to tell you psychology is just about positive thinking. That's not it. This isn't about sitting in a corner chanting affirmations. Psychology is about training your mind, your body, your emotions, stuff, so that when the storm hits, and it will hit, you don't crumble, you don't panic, you don't throw away your vision. Instead, you stay grounded, you stay certain, you stay in a state of absolute focus and commitment. That's the psychology of a leader. Stuff, I want you to imagine this. You will wake up tomorrow morning and suddenly your biggest client cancels, your supplier raises prices, your competitor launches something new, and the market shifts overnight. What happens to you? Do you crumble, stuff? Do you spiral into fear? Or do you step into absolute certainty, saying, no matter what, I'll find a way. No matter what, I'll adapt. No matter what, I'll make this work. That response is not about strategy. That's psychology, stuff. And here's something I've seen over and over again. People who focus only on strategy tend to become what I call strategic addicts. They're constantly looking for the next plan, the next tactic, the next hack, stuff. They get a little dopamine hit from the idea of a new strategy, but when it comes to actually following through, when it comes to doing the hard work, facing rejection, making uncomfortable decisions, they collapse, stuff. Because their psychology isn't conditioned to endure. Their psychology isn't trained for the long game. But when your psychology is strong, when you've trained yourself to push through pain, stuff, when you've conditioned yourself to run toward problems instead of away from them, then even an imperfect strategy will work, because you'll make it work. You'll adapt, you'll refine, you'll pivot until it produces results. Stuff. That's why some entrepreneurs make a fortune with strategies that others said would never work. It wasn't the strategy, it was the psychology behind it. They believed so strongly, they acted so decisively, they created momentum that made the plan succeed. Stuff. Meanwhile, others sat on the sidelines with the so-called perfect strategy, paralyzed by doubt, waiting for conditions to be perfect, and they went nowhere. And here's the challenge. Your psychology is not built in the good times. Stuff. Anybody can feel confident when the money's flowing, when the clients are saying yes, when the team is aligned. Your psychology is forged in the fire. It's built in the moments when things don't go your way, when the economy shifts. Stuff. When your ad campaign fails, when your product launch flops, that's when you discover what you're made of. That's when you train your nervous system to stay certain, to stay hungry, to keep moving forward. Now I want you to really hear me on this. If you want to scale your business, the first thing you have to scale is yourself, because your business is always a reflection of you as the leader. If you're overwhelmed, your business will be chaotic. If you're indecisive, your business will stall. Stuff. If you're fearful, your team will hesitate. But if you're centered, if you're strong, if you're relentless, your business will reflect that energy. So don't just go hunting for the next strategy. Ask yourself, stuff, what is the psychology I'm bringing to this game? Do I have the psychology of someone who is all in? Do I have the psychology of someone who sees problems as gifts, challenges as opportunities, setbacks as fuel? Stuff. Or do I have the psychology of someone who runs when it gets tough, who waits for certainty, who hesitates at the edge of opportunity? Because that one distinction will determine everything. And here's the final piece. Stuff. Psychology isn't something you get once and you're done. It's a daily practice. Just like you train your body, you must train your mind. You must put yourself in states of certainty, confidence, passion, and hunger every single day. Stuff. You must condition your nervous system for resilience. Because the storms will come, and when they do, you won't rise to the level of your strategy, you'll fall to the level of your psychology. You know what fascinates me? Stuff. How many entrepreneurs obsess over their strategy, but forget the one thing that actually brings that strategy to life, people? I've met so many business owners who say, Tony, I've built the perfect business plan. I've mapped out the funnels, the ads, stuff, and the sales process. I've got everything nailed down, and yet they're frustrated. They can't figure out why their company isn't scaling. They can't figure out why, despite the brilliance of their strategy, the execution is falling flat. Stuff. And I tell them, listen, your strategy is only as strong as the people who execute it. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The best strategy in the world is worthless if your team doesn't have the energy, the alignment, the hunger, this stuff, and the belief to bring it to life. Businesses don't grow because of paper plans. Businesses grow because of people who are inspired, empowered, and willing to give everything they've got. Think about it. Have you ever seen two companies in the same industry, stuff, with similar strategies competing in the same market? One of them is thriving, growing like crazy, and the other one is struggling, even though on paper their strategies don't look all that different. What makes the difference? It's the culture. Stuff. One company has built a team where people are alive, where they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, where they're driven to innovate, to serve, to execute at the highest level. The other company, stuff. Their people are clocking in and clocking out, doing the minimum, following the plan, but with no fire, no ownership, no soul. I'll never forget working with a business leader years ago who was frustrated that his company wasn't scaling. Stuff. He kept tweaking his strategy, spending money on consultants, rewriting plans, changing structures, but nothing was shifting. Finally, I asked him, how often do you actually invest in your people? How often do you connect with them, inspire them? Stuff. Build their confidence, make them feel like they're part of a mission, not just a machine. He paused. He realized he had been treating his employees like pieces in a puzzle instead of human beings with hearts, minds, and potential. Stuff. He was trying to grow a company without growing the culture, and the moment he shifted, the moment he started pouring energy into his team, everything changed. They became engaged, they owned the mission, stuff, and suddenly the strategy they had been struggling with started to come alive. Because here's the truth, culture is the force multiplier. It turns an average strategy into a winning one. It turns ordinary people into extraordinary performers. Stuff. When people feel connected to a vision, when they feel their work matters, when they trust their leaders and believe in the mission, they will execute with a level of intensity and creativity that no strategy can replicate on its own. And let me be clear, stuff. Building culture is not about having ping-pong tables in the office or free snacks in the break room. That's not culture. Culture is about values. It's about leadership. It's about creating an environment where people know what is expected of them. Stuff. Where they feel supported to grow, where they feel challenged to rise, and where they feel recognized when they deliver. Culture is about energy. It's about identity. Stuff. It's about shaping the psychology of the group so that everyone is aligned and moving in the same direction. When you build that kind of culture, strategy becomes flexible. You can pivot quickly. You can adapt to changing conditions. Stuff. Because you've got people who are committed, who are resilient, who aren't just following orders, but who are thinking like owners. And let me tell you something, the most scalable thing in any business is ownership. When your team takes ownership, you don't have to micromanage every detail. You don't have to be the bottleneck. You don't have to be the one carrying the whole load. Your culture carries it with you. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine walking into your business tomorrow and every single person on your team is lit up with energy. They're not waiting for you to tell them what to do. They're not dragging their feet. They're not just there for the paycheck. They're driven. They're innovating. They're solving problems before you even know the problems exist. They're coming up with ideas, pushing boundaries, and serving clients at the highest level. Can you feel the difference in that kind of environment? That's culture. And that's what scales a business far more than any single strategy ever could. But here's the challenge: culture doesn't happen by accident. Culture is created by design or by default. If you don't actively shape your culture, it will shape itself, and usually it won't be the culture you want. So as a leader, you have to be intentional. You have to decide, what do we stand for? What do we value? How do we show up for each other? How do we treat our clients? What's non-negotiable in this company? And then you don't just put those values on a poster, you live them, you breathe them. You enforce them, because culture isn't what you say, culture is what you tolerate. I've seen leaders tolerate negativity, gossip, laziness, excuses, and then wonder why their culture feels toxic. It's simple. What you tolerate is what you teach. If you want a culture of excellence, you can't tolerate mediocrity. If you want a culture of ownership, you can't tolerate excuses. If you want a culture of innovation, you can't punish failure. You set the tone as the leader, and your team follows. And here's the beautiful part. When you build a powerful culture, it attracts talent. People want to be part of it. It becomes magnetic. The best people don't just want a paycheck. They want purpose. They want to feel like their work matters, like they're part of a mission worth fighting for. When your culture provides that you don't have to chase talent, they come to you. And not only do they come, they stay, they grow, and they multiply your impact. Think about some of the most iconic companies in the world. Sure, they had great strategies, but what made them unstoppable was the culture. Apple wasn't just about products, It was about a culture of innovation and thinking differently. Starbucks wasn't just about coffee, it was about a culture of community and connection. Southwest Airlines wasn't just about cheap flights, it was about a culture of fun and customer love. These cultures turn simple strategies into global revolutions. Now ask yourself, what kind of culture are you building in your business? When your people walk into work each day, do they feel drained or do they feel alive? Do they feel like they're trading hours for dollars? Or do they feel like they're building something that matters? Do they fear making mistakes? Or do they feel safe to innovate and grow? Because the answers to those questions will tell you more about your scalability than any spreadsheet ever could. And here's something else. Culture is not static, it evolves. You have to nurture it, protect it, and constantly reinforce it. Just like your psychology, your culture needs daily investment, it needs leadership, it needs rituals and habits that reinforce what matters most. Without that, it starts to drift. And when culture drifts, execution slips. And when execution slips, no strategy can save you. So the real secret is this: if you want to scale your business, stop obsessing over the perfect strategy and start obsessing over building a culture that executes, a culture that adapts, a culture that owns the mission, a culture that lives and breathes the vision. Because strategy might point the way, but culture is the engine that drives you there. When it comes to scaling a business, I see this pattern over and over again. Entrepreneurs fall in love with the idea of strategy, but they completely underestimate the power of execution. Everybody wants the magic plan, the 10-step formula, the new funnel, the perfect set of instructions that will take their business to the next level. And listen, having a plan is important, but here's what nobody wants to admit: the plan doesn't mean anything without execution. Think about it for a second. Knowledge is everywhere today. You can go online right now and find out how to build an online store, how to run Facebook ads, how to create content, how to hire a team, and how to raise capital. Every strategy is available at your fingertips. If information alone were the key, everyone would already be successful, but they're not. Why? Because it's not information that creates results, it's execution. Execution is the bridge between your ideas and your reality. Execution is what transforms a dream into something tangible. Without it, your vision remains just a fantasy, a nice thought that never makes it into the world. And what separates the businesses that scale from the ones that stagnate is not who has the better plan, it's who executes faster, better, and more consistently. I'll never forget working with a group of entrepreneurs in one of my business mastery events. I gave them a challenge: take an idea, and instead of spending weeks polishing it, planning it, tweaking it, I told them they had 72 hours to execute. And guess what? Stuff. Some of them created more results in those 3 days than they had in the past 3 months. Not because they found some hidden strategy, but because they finally got out of their heads and into action. See, stuff. The problem is most people get caught in what I call paralysis by analysis. They keep refining the plan. They keep adjusting the details. They keep saying, I'll start when it's perfect. But perfection is the enemy of execution. Perfection kills momentum. The businesses that scale are not the ones that wait until everything is flawless. They are the ones that execute, learn, adjust, and keep moving forward. And let's be real, execution requires courage. Because the moment you execute stuff, you open yourself up to failure, you open yourself up to rejection, you open yourself up to the possibility that it won't work. And that's why so many people avoid it. They stay in planning mode because it feels safe. It feels productive. You're busy, stuff, you're researching, you're mapping things out, but the truth is you're not actually moving forward. Execution is where you risk. Execution is where you risk. Execution is where you grow. Execution is where you find out what you're really made of. Now let's talk about momentum stuff, because this is where the magic happens. Momentum doesn't come from thinking, it comes from doing. Once you start executing, even if you stumble, you create movement, you create the energy, you create feedback that tells you what's working and what's not. Stuff, and the faster you execute, the faster you learn. The faster you learn, the faster you adapt, and the faster you adapt, the faster you grow. That's how scaling really happens. It's a cycle of execution, feedback, adjustment, and execution again. Stuff. Let me give you an example. Think about companies like Amazon. Do you think Jeff Bezos had the perfect strategy from day one? Absolutely not. In fact, a lot of the things Amazon tried in the early days didn't work. But what set them apart was their willingness to execute relentlessly, test relentlessly, and learn relentlessly. They didn't just talk about ideas in meetings. They took action, measured results, and adapted. Stuff. That relentless execution created momentum that allowed them to grow into one of the biggest companies in the world. And here's something else that's critical. Execution requires discipline. It requires a standard. You can't just execute when you feel like it. Stuff. You can't just execute when conditions are perfect. If you want to scale, you have to execute every single day, no matter what. Because consistency compounds. Small actions taken consistently create massive results over time. But inconsistency kills momentum. Stuff. One day of action followed by a week of hesitation destroys your ability to build scale. I want you to ask yourself honestly, how much of what you know are you actually executing? How much of what you've learned in courses, events, books, stuff, podcasts is actually being applied in your business every single day? Because the truth is, most people know what to do, they're just not doing it. And until you execute, you don't get results. Let me share a metaphor with you. Stuff. Imagine you've got a rocket ship on the launch pad. You've spent years designing it, planning it, and perfecting it, but unless you ignite the engines, it's never going to leave the ground. Execution is the ignition. Stuff. Execution is the fuel that takes your strategy off the paper and into orbit. Without it, your strategy is just a pretty rocket sitting there doing nothing. And let's be clear, execution isn't about doing everything yourself. Stuff. That's another mistake entrepreneurs make. They think they have to be the ones executing every detail. No, execution is about building systems, empowering your team, delegating effectively, stuff, and making sure that action is happening at every level of your organization. Execution is not just what you do personally, it's what you create in your culture so that execution becomes the default mode of your business. But here's the real kicker. Execution creates confidence. When you act, when you execute, even if you don't have it all figured out, you build certainty, you prove to yourself that you can handle whatever comes. You create evidence that you're moving forward. Stuff. And that confidence fuels even more execution. It's a cycle. Action breeds confidence, confidence breeds more action, and that cycle is how momentum builds. On the other hand, inaction breeds doubt, doubt breeds fear, and fear breeds paralysis. Stuff. Which cycle are you in right now? I've seen people execute a mediocre strategy with absolute focus and consistency and produce extraordinary results. And I've seen people sit on brilliant strategies for years and never get anywhere. Stuff. That should tell you everything you need to know. It's not the brilliance of the strategy that matters, it's the commitment to execution. So here's the challenge: stop waiting for perfect. Stop waiting for more information. Stuff. Stop waiting for someone else to give you permission. The only thing that's going to scale your business is execution. Messy, imperfect, relentless execution. You don't need to know the whole staircase to take the first step. Stuff. You don't need to have all the answers to make progress. You just need to execute, learn, adjust, and execute again. That's the game. That's how you scale. One of the biggest myths in business is that if you just work harder, you'll scale. People say, stuff, Tony, I'm grinding 16 hours a day. I'm hustling nonstop. I'm doing everything I can, but my business still isn't scaling. And I tell them, listen, effort alone will not create scale. Hard work is admirable stuff, but hard work without leverage is a trap. You can't scale by doing more of what you're already doing. You scale by creating leverage, by building systems, by multiplying your impact so that your business grows beyond what you personally can touch. Think about it this way. Every one of us has the same 24 hours in a day. That's the one resource you cannot expand. I don't care how smart you are, how ambitious you are, how talented you are. You don't get 25 hours. You don't get 30 hours. The only way to grow beyond your own capacity is to leverage the resources around you, your people, your systems, your technology, your capital, your partnerships. That's how you multiply. I'll never forget working with a small business owner who was doing everything himself. He was running the marketing, the sales calls, the accounting, even the customer service. He was exhausted. He had hit a ceiling because there were no more hours in his day. He thought the problem was his strategy. He kept tweaking his ads, redoing his website, changing his offers. But the real problem wasn't his strategy. It was his lack of leverage. He was trapped in the belief that only he could do things right. And as long as he held onto that belief, his business could never scale. The moment he started hiring the right people, building processes, and letting go of control, his business exploded. Not because the strategy changed but because the structure around the strategy finally had leverage. Leverage is about multiplying output without multiplying input. It's about getting more done with less effort. And the truth is, most entrepreneurs don't think in terms of leverage. They think in terms of effort. They think, if I just push harder, if I just grind longer, eventually I'll get there. But all that does is burn you out. You don't build an empire by being the hardest worker in the room. You build an empire by being the most resourceful, by creating systems that work when you're not working, by building teams that move the mission forward without you being there every second. And let's talk about systems, because this is where leverage lies. Systems are what make your business scalable. A system is simply a process that produces consistent results without requiring your constant energy. Think about McDonald's. Is their hamburger the best in the world? Absolutely not. But they've built one of the most scalable businesses on the planet because of systems. They can open a location anywhere in the world, plug in their system, and deliver a consistent experience every time. That's leverage. Now, I know some of you listening right now might be thinking, but Tony, I'm not McDonald's, I'm not Amazon, I don't have that kind of scale, and I get it. But here's the truth, leverage and systems aren't just for billion-dollar companies. They're for you right now, wherever you are. Even if you're a one-person business, you can create systems, you can automate your processes, you can outsource tasks that don't require your genius, you can leverage technology to free up your time and energy. The earlier you start thinking in terms of leverage, the faster you can scale. Here's something else about leverage. It forces you to shift your identity as a leader. Because let's be honest, a lot of entrepreneurs secretly like being the hero. They like being the one who knows everything, who solves every problem, who carries the company on their back. But that identity is the very thing holding them back from scaling. To scale, you have to let go of being the hero and become the architect. You have to design a business that works because of the systems, not because of your constant presence. And that requires trust. It requires empowering other people. It requires letting go of control and focusing on building leverage instead of doing it all yourself. Let me ask you a question. If you disappeared from your business for 90 days, what would happen? Would everything fall apart? Would sales stop? Would operations break down? Would your clients be left hanging? Or would the systems and people you've put in place keep things running, maybe even growing? The answer to that question tells you whether you're truly building a scalable business or just building a job for yourself. Because here's the thing, if your business depends on you, you don't own a business, you own a job. And scaling is impossible when everything is tied to your personal effort. But when your business depends on systems and leverage, you finally step into freedom. You finally create something that grows bigger than you. I'll give you another example. Years ago, I worked with an entrepreneur who had an incredible product. His clients loved it. His strategy was solid, but he was stuck in the weeds. Every order had to go through him. Every client question came to him. He was the bottleneck. And no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't scale. The breakthrough came when he started building systems for fulfillment, training his team to handle client issues, and leveraging technology to automate the repetitive tasks. Within a year, his revenue doubled, not because he found a new strategy, but because he finally freed himself from being the bottleneck. That's the power of leverage. It's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. It's about asking stuff. How can I design this business so that it runs without me? How can I create processes, people, and systems that multiply the results of every action? When you start asking those questions, you stop thinking like an operator and start thinking like a scaler. Stuff. And let's be clear, leverage doesn't just mean technology and automation. It also means leveraging the talents of people. No one scales alone. You need a team of leaders who think, act, and own the mission. Stuff. You need to surround yourself with people who are better than you in certain areas, who can take things further than you ever could on your own. And that requires humility. Stuff. It requires letting go of the need to control everything and instead empowering others to rise. Some of you right now are trying to save money by doing everything yourself. You think, I'll just wear all the hats until I can afford to hire. But the truth is, stuff. You can't afford not to hire. Because every moment you spend doing tasks that someone else could do is a moment you're not using your genius. And your genius is the most valuable leverage you have. Stuff. When you free yourself from the low-value tasks and focus on the high-value activities only you can do, that's when your business begins to scale. And this is where systems and leverage create freedom. Freedom to think bigger. Freedom to innovate. Stuff. Freedom to lead instead of just manage. Freedom to focus on growth instead of constantly putting out fires. Without leverage, you're trapped in the grind. With leverage, you create space for exponential growth. So the real question is not, stuff, what's my next strategy? The real question is, where can I create leverage? What systems do I need? Who do I need on my team? What technology can I use? Stuff, how can I multiply my impact so that my business grows even when I'm not there? Because that's what scaling is. Scaling isn't about adding more hours, more effort, more struggle. It's about creating a machine that multiplies results. Stuff, powered by leverage and systems that work, whether you're grinding 16 hours a day or sitting on a beach. So here's the truth, my friends. Strategy matters, but strategy alone will never scale your business. You've seen it now from every angle. You can have the perfect plan, the best blueprint, the most cutting-edge tactics, but without the psychology to execute it with certainty, without the hunger that drives you beyond excuses, without the relentless ability to adapt when the world changes, stuff, and without the leverage of people, systems, and resources, you will hit a ceiling every single time. Scaling is not about working harder. Scaling is about becoming more. It's about transforming yourself from an operator into a leader, stuff, from a manager into a visionary, from someone who is trapped in their business to someone who builds a business that can thrive without them. It's about mastering the psychology of leadership, stuff, cultivating the emotional fitness to break through fear and uncertainty, harnessing the power of relentless innovation, and building systems that multiply your impact exponentially. Because when you step into that level of ownership, when you stop relying on strategy as your savior and instead combine it with psychology, adaptability, and leverage, you stop playing small. You stop living in survival mode. You create a business that doesn't just grow, but scales. Stuff. You create freedom for yourself, opportunity for others, and an impact that lasts far beyond you. That's the game. That's what separates the businesses that fizzle out from the ones that become unstoppable. Stuff. It's not just about strategy. It's about the human being behind the strategy. It's about you.